it's so lovely to be with you. It's always weird giving these presentations when you're sort of staring into a screen, as I am sitting in my sitting room, as I'm sure all of you are in your own spaces. But thank you for being here, and I look forward to any questions that you want to put to me and being part of the forum as well. So as was said, we're talking about a project called Maternal Journal that I started in 2017. That's the website address there, and this is a fantastic image created by one of our participants in the first group called Hannah, and that was using an image of herself pregnant and then also working on top of it with imagery. And as is suggested by that imagery, the project was really conceived to support women who have mental health problems going through pregnancy, birth, and into parenthood. And I think this is a fantastic kind of illustration of the kind of clouds and the rain, but also some of the sort of joy and hope that perhaps we all experience through mothering, but particularly if you're having mental health problems, the up downs. So Maternal Journal, as I said, is very much around this idea of creative journaling to support mental health and well-being. It started with a group of women who were mostly pregnant, and that was how it was thought of initially. I work as a midwife, so most of my work is with women who are going through pregnancy and only up to 28 days after they've given birth. And so that sort of focus around that kind of transition into mothering was how the project started. But it's now really expanded to include sort of any group of women or birthing people that have gone through a birth experience, whatever that might be and wherever they are on that journey. This is a lovely image of the Founding Mothers group, as I was just talking about, who have become this incredibly powerful and sort of focus group who now sort of inform the project. So it's very much now kind of co-produced with these mothers. So what is journaling? I mean, it might be something that's familiar to you, but not to everybody. So it's a concept that could include the idea of keeping a diary, a sketchbook, or any kind of regular practice. You can see here a display of journals on the right-hand side, which was from that original group, which we were part of a wider project run by the Institute of Psychiatry, and an exhibition of those journals, and you can see the kind of range of work they're produced. And that's one of our participants, Chantal, on the left. So why journaling in pregnancy, birth and beyond, as sort of how we describe the project now. And just these bullet points hopefully kind of really start to encapsulate why journaling this project has really taken off and why it really supports people. And I think it's a lot to do with the fact that, you know, going through this process into being a mother, being a parent is a time of such great change, challenge, but also opportunity for growth. And the journal provides a space in which not only people can find a space for personal reflection, but they can also use it for social and political views. It's a very kind of broad genre. And generally, there's so much research around how creativity supports your mental health and well-being. And as you saw in some of those images of journals, we're using all sorts of kind of genres of creating, from writing, poetry, prose, cartooning, collage, visual art of all types. And also, as you can see, journaling, our kind of format is to do this in groups. A lot of these are happening via Zoom, though also all our resources can be used for individuals, but it provides either face-to-face or Zoom, or even connection through the social media kind of handles and activity support, and in that way also addresses some of the kind of issues of isolation that mothers, particularly new mothers, feel. And I think the project very much connects with the feminist and radical tradition of journaling. So journaling or keeping a diary was a kind of an acceptable way of women often writing, being journalists, and so it has this incredible history, and that's a really great thing that we connect our participants to. Within that, we try to, and that's addressing this particular question from today around the maternal narratives. I think it by using all sorts of voices and connecting people to all sorts of voices of mothering and parenting. It's a way of challenging some of the damaging stereotypes and cultural frameworks, particularly around mothering. So it's just one of our illustrators that we work with, and I think this illustration we commissioned from her, again, really encapsulates what the project is about, which is about bringing people together, finding a space for their creativity, finding a space for support. And the sort of historical legacies that I was talking about before that we connect people to is very broad. And so we look back at people like Frida Kahlo, who actually kept a sketchbook for most of her creative life. She didn't want them published, but they have since been published. And I think it's really interesting when you look at her work and the sort of way that this kind of image, for example, on the right, is a really interesting kind of combination of text, very personal reflection, drawing, and again looking at her own self-identity. And this was all this work was being done in her sketchbook. And we encourage people to really look broadly at that history. So someone that we talk about quite a lot is Idb Wells, who is an American suffragist, civil rights campaigner and diarist. And the sort of political and social kind of comment that I was talking about that can be part of the journal. She's someone who can be really, really inspiring in that sense. So looking at contemporary journals about childbirth, there's such an amazing kind of range of voices now out there. So on the left is Holly Mcnish, who has written a really powerful account of her first 2 years as a mother called Nobody Told Me. She's actually part of the project, which is really great. She's run workshops for us, and also there's a journaling guide that she's created. And on the right-hand side is an image from a graphic novel by Henny Beaumont called Hole in the Heart. And that's an account of her experience of giving birth to a child who had Down syndrome, that she was not diagnosed in pregnancy. And again, it's really important, and we connect our participants to these very diverse experiences of mothering. And these are some other examples of kind of recent journals, what I would describe them as. So they're both actually American artists. So there's Nefertiti Austin, Motherhood So White, and I think at the moment it's incredibly important to be hearing powerful stories from Black women of their experiences of mothering. And this account, as it says, a memoir of race, gender and parenting in America, is a really political as well as a personal account of her experiences. And on the right hand side, A.K. Summers, her graphic book called Pregnant Butch, which is about her experiences as a butch lesbian woman going through pregnancy. So these are some examples, the kind of journaling guides that we create. There's kind of 3 different types in the project. So these are our longer guides. So the one on the left is by a visual artist called Barbie Asante. It's called Revolutionary Mothering, and it's very much about looking at mothers that are on the margins. So mothers that might be Black or brown. It's talking about women that are in extreme situations, perhaps living through war or conflict, and how all of our mothering can be revolutionary because we all face barriers. And then on the right hand side is a beautiful guide created by poet Tolu, which is about writing into the gap, and she gives lots of kind of different prompts for people to reflect about their expectations of motherhood, their experiences of motherhood, and then their kind of aspirations for their children. So you can see with these longer guides, they're very sort of step by step. We give timings, we give how we introduce different artists for people to look at for inspiration. We suggest what materials to use. So it's really taking people by the hand through this process and basically trying to support their own creativity. These are some mini guides that we really ramped up during lockdown. So we were posting these pretty much every day. And we've now got 39 of them on our website. And I think to address again the question of what maternal narratives do we need to hear about at the moment. These mini guides were very much trying to support people going through the lockdown, particularly mothers who were juggling experiences of trying to look after children, homeschool children, having to work at home, all these sort of incredible issues of mother's work. And so the one on the left-hand side by Pia, who's also in our Founding Mothers group and is an artist. I love her guide here that she created, Machine Me. So it's a kind of a collage project where it's kind of looking at all these different roles. On the right-hand side by Alice, another kind of reflection on this where she encourages you to fill up the hand with all the things that your hand has done. So it's about sort of self-care, caring for others, domestic work, professional work, etc. that we were, particularly mothers, were having to face during lockdown. And then the third type of guide we create is art-inspired journaling. So this one is kind of looking at a poem by American poet Sharon Olds. And this one particularly, and I think this is another sort of strand in the project, is trying to address kind of unsaid aspects of mothering and taboos around mothering. So this wasn't about how you feel about your body, how you feel about sex after birth. And it's another way of kind of introducing participants to sort of inspiring artists, different voices of motherhood. So as I mentioned before, the project started as a group format, and on our website toolkit, which gives everybody all the resources they need to set up and run a group, whether that's now face-to-face or Zoom. And these are some really nice images of people in groups, and you can see people with their babies writing, and again kind of defying the idea that motherhood and creativity is somehow kind of a separate or exclusive activity. And I take a lot of sort of joy from these sessions where people are creating incredible work whilst also looking after their babies, or the babies being passed around to everybody in the group, and everybody's kind of co-mothering whatever child is in the room. And these are just some quotes which I found, which I thought were quite interesting in terms of, again, the kind of provocation today about sort of diverse voices and what narratives we want to hear, and how the project hopefully gives sort of value and space for everybody's voice, and how so many people who perhaps don't feel they are creative can be given the resources and the support to explore their own creativity, and therefore also have a means to reflect on their experiences as mothers. So this one, I'm loving being introduced to the artists and trying out things I wouldn't have done on my own initiative. It's inspiring and energy giving. I feel excited and like I'm someone doing something creative and good that people are really interested in. I guess I mean that it has given me confidence. I always feel like I know one whose things aren't interesting enough to talk about. So I think that kind of addresses quite a lot of issues of women and mothers feeling invisible, people who perhaps have been told that they're not creative, that somehow they can't now explore that in themselves, and also pointing to this time of incredible sort of change and opportunity of becoming a parent. So this is my last slide. So this is just again to give you the website and our social media, and if you come to the website you can download all of those guides. We've got 9 longer guides, we've got 30 mini guides, and we've got all the art inspired as well guides that are mostly on social media but will be going on the website soon. And we post lots of stuff on social media all the time. Everything's free. The groups are run, it's a peer-led support movement. So all the groups are led by people that download the toolkit and get support to do so. So there's a range of people from, artists, doulas, midwives, and they sometimes charge nominal amount. It's a non-profit organisation, or they raise money and get grants or funding. We've also had support from the NHS and had quite a few groups through the NHS with perinatal services. So yeah, just head over to our website, have a look, and thanks very much.
The Bermuda I grew up in was segregated according to race. The schools, the pews in churches, seats in theaters, wards in the hospital, restaurants, jobs, everything, every aspect of life. So in the marginalized community in which I grew up, I was taught the importance of respect for self and others, the importance of trying to find out who I was, and crucially, the importance of making my way in the world. Looking back, I can see that I did make my way and have had a good life. No regrets, even for those parts that did not work out. In Bermuda, I get reminders from other people, friends, people with whom I may have worked or whom I taught many, many moons ago. And they shout out, "Saltus, you're looking good. I want to be like you when I grow up." And I reply, "Hang in there. Your turn is coming." And we reminisce and have a good laugh. Funnily enough, many of the limitations racism placed upon me as a young person have parallels to the limitations placed upon me as a senior by ageism. I can remember I had occasion to go to a lawyer's office. There were documents that needed to be renewed and signed, and there were 3 people and a lawyer. And although I was sitting almost directly across from him, he never looked at me. But he expected that I would sign the documents because that is what we were there for. I intentionally delayed signing them in order to read them. I knew that the way he acted had everything to do with my age. Fortunately, I know now how to respond to attitudes like that and don't let them hinder my making my way in the world. Here I am, coming to live in Cardiff at age 77, making a new home where I expect to live the rest of my senior years. I have reminders, visual reminders, pictures of my family, my ancestors, my children, my grandson, colleagues, friends. But most of all, as I make my way in my new home, I will draw on those childhood lessons in respect and identity. I'm now excitedly looking forward to whatever the future holds. I don't know how long that future will be, but for sure I plan to make the best of it. My favorite saying puts all of what I've said in 2 sentences. It's not what you think I ought to want. It's what I think I ought to want.
The Bermuda I grew up in was desegregated, yet fractured by race, class, and color. So in the marginalized community in which I grew up, I was taught the importance of respect for self and others, the importance of trying to find out who I was, and crucially, the importance of making my way in the world. Looking back, I can say that this was taught from the womb. Self-determination, self-love, and self-pride were tattooed on my inner landscape by my mother with a single-mindedness and a fierceness of a woman determined to raise her children to do well in the world, despite the odds. My mum's brand of mothering was not the easy, sweet kind. She is no Madonna, not least because doing maternal came hard for her, as she herself would tell you. To this day, we joke, seriously joke, that she does not have a maternal bone in her body. Although softened by the long passage of time, Mummy's caring practices and nurturing intimacies remain aloof, guarded, and conditional, of the ambivalent, mothering kind.
Perhaps that's why I didn't know what to do when I saw my mom crying for the first time ever in my life. Mummy crying. I was so shocked. She had been talking about the digital story she had worked on, and then she just started crying. I stared in shock, and then finally I reached out and I traced my fingers down her arm. Just briefly, just enough, I think. It was a strange, intimate moment when I looked at my mom in a completely different light. The moment was made that much stranger because we were not alone or even at home. We were in a seminar room full of members of my research team who were taking part in a digital storytelling workshop. Looking back, it was in this moment, stroking my mum's arm to comfort her in front of my new research team, that I stopped worrying about my need for her to be near. My worry of the maternal at work. My mum joined my work as a breathing, contributing presence seen by others and not part of my hinterland, my private domestic world, when I needed her most. She moved closer just as I was making the conscious decision to actively lean into my own research passion and to put two fingers up to all those who thought such research was lazy, obvious, and not pressing or timely. I was at a crossroads and I knew I had to find my way. And two things pulled me through: successful grants to develop my research and pulling Mummy closer. For with her came her home site teachings. With her, I remembered myself. I remembered how she had weathered the storms. Needing her, of course, was problematic. I was ambivalent. I was conflicted at first. I was embarrassed. But on that day, as I traced my fingers down her arm, something gave way. Here I am now, engaged in work rooted in migration, aging, and well-being. My mom has conducted literature reviews, and she's developed a second story about the digital storytelling process. Fortunately, over the years, I have also learned more about Mummy than possibly any other period in my life. Working with her has been a platform into her closed private world. I'm going about doing what I want to do, having drawn on a woman who continues to claim that she does not have a maternal bone in her body, as my muse, my mentor, and my mother, in all its ambivalence.
So yeah, I'm a writer, performer, storyteller, and also I've just completed my first year of grandmotherhood. And I guess about a year ago, just over a year ago, when I became a grandmother and lost my mother at roughly the same time, I started working with ideas about the shawl vaggie, the traditional Welsh nursing shawl, as two things, I think, really, as a way of looking again and remembering again some of my own personal narrative in relationship to a mythic context, and the way that is carried out into the world in a very practical and earthy way. And looking at the weave of the shawl and the weave of story through that. And also, in thinking about that, in remembering, in thinking about the shawl itself as a kind of a receptacle and a kind of a translating zone as well for a particular version of mother tongue. So with word and narrative, I started to pick apart and reweave what the wearing of a nursing shawl might be. And currently I have 3 short audio pieces, audio stories, which are online on my site. And I still feel I'm a bit at the beginning of the process of looking at this. But what I've got now to share with you this evening is not either of those 3 individual stories yet, but some more thinking about the background, some more thinking about the idea of the shawl vaggie, really, and how I started to work on it, and where I think I might be going with it, and why I think it's why it feels important.
Shawl vaggie, a shawl for carrying a baby or child towards the front of the body, leaving one arm free. In this way, the child can be fed, lulled, walked with, spoken to, or more or less ignored for long periods of time, while you, the wearer, continue with all your upright activities. The shawl vaggie is square, fringed on all sides, 6 foot by 6 foot, including fringes. Fold the shawl in half, make a triangle, wrap it round your shoulders, place the baby high and off-centered, wrap the corner of the shawl around the baby, bringing the baby back in towards you. The weight of the baby pulling down on the fabric holds it together. No tying, no knotting. Your one hand remains in close connection to perform intimate magic, the other external and active in the world. The ancientness of this. Today you can go to a sling library and borrow on the body baby carriers of all shapes and sizes. Front loaders, high back, wrap around, slip in, washable, wipe clean, weatherproof, to suit your size, shape and that of the baby, your lifestyle, how fast and how often you move, in what direction and with what purpose. Every country and culture has its own variety of the shawl vaggie. They always did, almost always. We began to do this around 2 million years ago, give or take. It's as likely that the first tool invented wasn't a flint knapping tool, not a fire stick, but a baby sling, a plant fibre woven or pelt baby carrier, rewoven again and again, leaving no traces as it decays over thousands of years. Like matryoshka dolls, a woman pregnant with her daughter, of course, also carries her embryonic grandchild. Inherited memory of colour, shape, experience stretches backwards on a cellular level and forwards to plan out our next journey. The baby girl carries all the eggs she will ever produce inside her at birth, which means that grandchildren are carried in potential seed form inside the mother, a kind of umbilical cord stretching back and forwards. The child carried within is the holder of memories and imprints, in ways understood and not understood, that connects the past with the future. The shawl vaggie becomes the first tender and robust sheath outside the body, enclosing a double-layered body now. It's full, weighty with words and the wordless. It is the first enveloping, sheathing garment of motherline. This has a beckoning resonance to storytellers and story lovers. And I am interested in the stories of the motherline, that which is passed down through mother knowing, and one part of this is to do with biological mothering and one part is not. The shawl vaggie is a place for nursing and breastfeeding, and the shawl itself was traditionally passed from mother to daughter, but not exclusively. Maggie in Welsh means to nurse, to feed, to nourish, also to bring up and to raise. And it was often used by grandmothers, grandfathers, or perhaps other members of the circle of kith and kin, or even in times of need outside that circle. So immediately we have an opening into stories about mothering and nurturing of many types and conditions. The stories that pass between a wearer of the shawl vagi and the child within happen in an intimate arena. They are close stories for the baby's ear, for the mother's tongue. The child lies intimately next to the body, across the shawl wearer's beating heart, amongst the sounds and smells and undulations of the large and small body. This is the personal boundary between safety and jeopardy, the vital proving ground of story. In this place, we piece together all that we need to know, all that we are most deeply connected with, where we're from, how to survive, and perhaps even how to prosper on the way. And these instructions that we are coded into and that we code into our ongoing story come in a strange language to speak and hear. Within the shawl vagi, the transmission of vital knowledge moves through pulse, heartbeat, breast milk, armpit smells, lullabies, soothe songs and suck songs. In Welsh there is something called bratiaith. In fact it means slang, jargon, a lesser or broken language usually used derisively. But one of its sources is from the word brat, an apron. It is apron tongue, one of the disregarded languages of the maternal. Ach in bratiaith, my sioliaith. Before apron tongue comes shawl tongue. The intimacy and close nature of the stories we tell close to home resonates somewhere with the stories we discover and become part of and tell out in the wide world. A weave of memories is passed on. In the shawl vagi, we may cross the boundary out into the world. Mother and baby can clip into any arena. Shawl tongue, apron tongue, aspects of the many-faceted mother tongue, the earliest thread in the weave of these stories. And remember again, these are old tongues, older than Paistinogad, made of signs and codes, words and phrases passed on liltingly. Mamiaith, mamiaith, the scintillating, multicoloured, common and particular tongue, made for the conceiving and uttering of story. We all pass on words that did not originate with us. In some cases, we do not even understand the language we speak, the things we hear. They are hidden deeper than linear A and B, deeper than pictogram and orgam stone. Do not doubt that they are matters of life and death, joyous and weighty. The shawl coils round us like a snake around the omphalos at the oracle of Delphi. The transformation from life to death and back again are the primary identifying aspects of what may be told in mother tongue. This gives us a vast store from which to tell our own story, which contains all the resonance it needs. Crossing into jeopardy, all sorts of complexities may flow into our story world. The breast that we lie against in our shawl vagi may be an angry one, a stony one. The heart we lie against may be a resentful heart, a broken heart. But there is a vital passing on. We survived and we live to tell the tale. Intimate wrapping can and will travel.
So good evening, my name's Alison and I'm a midwife. Over a year ago, I was awarded a National Institute of Health Research Fellowship to develop a PhD project looking to better support the transition that women make to mothering, motherhood, and maternal identities. So my offering this evening is a short talk about my own pathway, rather than by any means a final project. Essentially, this fellowship has given me a supported space in which to engage and learn about what really matters to women as mothers. As a midwife in London of many years, I've been conscious that despite good access to evidence-based information and care, Much of becoming a mother is uncharted territory, and I'm sure many of us here tonight might agree this to be inevitable. But I've continually been struck by what is missing, and it seems to me that what's still missing is the woman herself. From a health research point of view, it is increasingly well known that maternal health provides a window into the woman's future health and that of the baby. Stress and anxiety levels prior to pregnancy are understood to play a role in longer-term health for mother and baby and arguably society. The cost burden to perinatal mental health has gained increasing attention too recently. But at risk of creating expectations for women to perform a Zen-like mindset and perfectly balance their health in pregnancy and beyond, what are we actually doing to meet women's needs and truly make space for their story? The topic of story in maternal health has put me in touch with a wonderfully wide range of people and organizations, from traditional storytellers to the World Health Organization and to a Mohawk birth center in Canada. In the UK, the Better Birth campaign recognizes the need to improve outcomes and is based upon concepts including continuity of care and personalization. Both concepts begin to address the thinking that women need to be participants rather than recipients of their care. And this isn't merely a kindness, but it has direct health outcomes. Jane Sandell's work from King's College has for years picked apart the concept of continuity of care and crucially recognizes the sort of relational aspects of having a midwife who knows you. Continuity of care, one could argue, is care that allows a woman's story to unfold. With space to speak, people to listen, story is another way of saying woman-centered. Story acts as a metaphor for self and essence. And so the direction of travel in my own research has been to seek and to understand the different ways in which story links to well-being and maternal health. And then for me to advocate for spaces that make space for story. I've taken encouragement from recent research, including a 2019 World Health Organization evidence report by Daisy Fancourt and Cersei Finn, which make the case for arts in health. The arts include story. Another project that's concerned with creating space for women's story includes the Risk Project. You might follow it on social media, which does more than provide the narrative of experience. It also helps clear the way for healthcare experiences that are more than the dispensation of information to women in a one-size-fits-all manner. The Pregnancy Circles Project, part of the REACH project from the University of East London, seeks to disrupt traditional models of care with group antenatal care, where women are caring for each other in an ongoing way. Anthony Costello's work has been really vital to my thinking, and he has done this book on sympathy groups. In it, he talks about maternal health in low and middle income countries, where he worked for years, and seeks to make space for a disruption to traditional models of care, to make space for the connectivity of story in pregnancy and what that means for the community setting. It's vital. When we speak of narrative in this time, which is what we were thinking about this evening, there's no doubt that the maternal narrative of the moment is really messy. Coronavirus has tripped us up in many ways of the pathways that we've taken for granted. But I wonder too, if it has unleashed some of the conversations that are well overdue. Black Lives Matter campaign and the pandemic highlight more than ever disparities in maternal health. It's forcing everyone to be creative and to consider pregnancy and mothering in new ways. This morning I spoke for an hour and a half, it was brilliant, to a woman called Charlotte Wolfe, who has beautifully created a space for story at her storytelling evenings called the Campfire Collective in West London. She does outreach work, and we hope to collaborate with her together shortly to enable a space for women at the hospital where I work. A storytelling friend of mine, an all-round wise man called Dan Yashinsky, makes the case that story is a form of care and calls for hospitals to have an accreditation of story care status. I agree with him. But for this pandemic, I was keen to contribute a provocation of story through which we would initiate our own stories of mother. The late Nell Gifford wrote a beautiful book entitled Nell and the Circus of Dreams. The story begins, that summer, Nell's mother was so ill that she did not get out of bed. The farmhouse was quiet, and Nell was sad. At the same time, last week in Vogue magazine, global health advocate Toyin Saraki illustrated a COVID tale of success for Nigerian mothers with a WhatsApp group. And so my closing for the evening is that it doesn't only matter about the story, but there is space for story in maternal health, and that we are all our own authors in that space. Thank you.
So my mother and I are both writers and educators, and we're working on a project at the moment, creating a series of 2-minute films, which is in progress. We're going to show you the rough cut today. And these films are letters between my mother and I about mothering. So when I had my first baby, I was living in the mountains of Pennsylvania. I was a young woman who'd had many miscarriages, and I was humbled and overjoyed that this first baby had survived. And wintering with this tiny baby, it dawned on me how much I did not know, and I turned to my mother for advice.
Growing up in a working class extended family, I was a much mothered child. When I had my own child, I was living in Hereford away from family, and I had a feeling of helplessness and isolation. So I tried hard, despite the distances, to be there for Zoe by traveling to the States, and I'm privileged to be able to do that, and digitally, which is better than nothing, but is not the real thing.
Right. So Blue Milk is a film which is about the joy of motherhood, but also its bittersweet nature and how it's also hard work. Motherhood can be tinged with grief and challenge as well as joy, and that needs to be talked about. 1 in 4 women experience miscarriage. Before I had my first child, I had 2 miscarriages, and I've had 2 more since. And I found, speaking about it, there was an overwhelming outpouring of stories from other women who had felt silenced and unable to talk about these stories. It's worth mentioning too that motherhood can be overwhelming, especially when mothers do not receive enough support. 1 in 10 women experience depression, but 1 in 9 women experience postnatal depression, which just goes to show how common it is. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Tracy has to say, because I know that she writes and talks a lot about the birthing process, which can be wonderful, but is also challenging, even traumatic, and sometimes this is the fault of institutions. It's well documented that medical institutions can diminish and dismiss women's pain, and if we're thinking about this through an intersectional feminist lens, we'll recognize that different women have different experiences. For example, it's been documented that Black women have had some very bad experiences in the birthing process, as has been shown by celebrity cases that have been reported on in the news.
when I was young, it was expected that you would stay at home with a young baby. And I've already said how isolating and challenging to a woman's self-worth that could be. And despite all the advances made in the intervening years, in the last 50 years, for women's rights, motherhood can still feel like a TARDIS, taking you back to the 1950s and constraining your role. We need stories and narratives which show us that mistakes are universal and how we can learn and try to put things right. There's such a pressure on mothers to be perfect, and this can cause us to doubt ourselves and fall into circles of guilt. Too many stories blame and demonize or exalt women as mothers. As the poet Liz Lockhead says, mothers always never loved you enough or too smothering much. So that, as she says, nobody's mother can't not never do nothing right. In the 1980s, I ran a collective of writers called Sinister Women, who wrote and performed their material. And the concerns that they had then about finding ways to explore their talents while being good mothers to their children is a dilemma which has not been fully resolved in the years since. The need to nurture, to do the best for children while pursuing personal dreams is complex and thought-provoking, because we are not just mothers. We have other pressures in play. Our different roles, our different groups, our different identities. Something which interests me is a concept which Rebecca Solnit has spoken about. I think that one of the things we should do through our narratives is explore the verb of mothering rather than the nouns mother and motherhood, because the verb includes rather than discriminates. Birth does indeed need its own narratives, but mothering is empowering because it's an active verb, and it is that verb that we need to explore in all its variety and colours. For not all women are mothers, but all women can be mothering.
So, in the context of the global pandemic, it's been interesting to see the stories that have been written about how women leaders are actually doing the best job at dealing with COVID-19. And I think this is something that's quite telling. Does this mean that we might be moving towards an ethics of mothering, rejecting patriarchal ideas about governance and care?
This is a lovely picture of Nina Simone and her daughter, but it contrasts badly with the newspaper's vilification of Simone while ignoring her struggles with racism, sexism, and mental issues. There are all kinds of mothering because motherhood is the jazz of living, taking a basic tune and syncopating, improvising, going into the zone of intuition and finding one's own rhythm. There is more than one way to be a mother.
Yeah. So we're going to show you the film now, and I'd like to ask you to think while you're watching it about challenges that you or people around you have faced as mothers, and to what extent was that down to lack of support from institutions and communities, and how can we create our own communities, just as some of the speakers have been describing, to fill in those gaps and what is missing.
And I would like you to think about, how do we document the mothering of those who came before, our mothers and grandmothers? An open dialogue about how mothering, a form of loving kindness, can inform narratives we write and which we want to read.
Motherhood is a choice you make every day to put someone else's happiness and well-being ahead of your own, and to forgive yourself over and over again for doing everything wrong. Donna Ball. Dear Mother, I'm writing you now from a far country where I bring up my children without you, and what they tell you about being a mother, hardly anything they say is exactly true. I never realized it could be so lonely. I didn't know when I began that not all pregnancies work out. I didn't know that only 2 out of my 6 pregnancies would survive. I didn't know how scared I'd feel the day my first was born, and he looked at me with those dark eyes. But I did know love. The milk I pumped for my babies had a bluish tinge like the blue vein in the breast that fed them. Talk to me. Tell me how it was for you. Cobalt blue.
Dear daughter, I didn't know that babies had a mind of their own. I didn't know that after birth my body would not spring back to its usual self. I didn't know the fears of what might happen, or of hidden dangers, or the vigilance of a watcher. I didn't know how upsetting it is not to be able to tie a nappy. I underestimated how much I needed my mother's advice. I'd read, you see, so much about pregnancy, babies. I did not know how much I did not know. For days, I lay staring at my tiny daughter with wonder. Not an appendage of me, but separate, unique, demanding. She would not just lie and gurgle or sit passively at parties. I told my partner, the baby will not change our life, but in fact, she would change the whole world.
Sky blue. Dear Mother, some days I feel like they're behind glass. What keeps me from my children? What takes me from my children? What if mothers didn't have to be perfect? What if we admitted that the physical labour of pregnancy is hard, that it can be traumatic, that the body remembers? What if we made our own communities of healing? What if women were paid a fair wage? What if we stopped the violence against black women and black families? What if we started talking about mothers and childbearing people? What if we lifted up those mothers who never give birth? What if some problems are beyond us to fix right now, though we fight them still? Can we still find joy? What if it could be messy? What if it could? Deep blue. There was something so valuable about what happened when one became a mother. For me, it was the most liberating thing that ever happened to me. Toni Morrison.
So I'm not going to show any visuals. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if you wish for the next 7 minutes, and you can listen to my voice. You'll hear a track coming in and out of the background, and maybe it will sound familiar to some of you. Okay. So I want to talk about birth. I always want to talk about birth, the act of giving birth and the stories we tell about it. I want to talk about birth stories because I don't think we talk about them enough. And when we do, we so easily fall into the grand cultural narrative form of telling in a linear way. This happened, then this, then this. And we give the highlights, the headlines, times, weights, general outcome, resolution. And of course, the fact that whatever happened, at least baby is okay or alive, unless in fact that isn't true. And then there are no words, no story. Birth stories are everywhere. As Della Pollock says in her book, Telling Bodies Performing Birth, they permeate our lives and they haunt us. They take on a ghostly feel because they hover at the edge of conversation. They are barely there, and yet all too much here in the body of the woman who holds the story. They often contain, quote, wide histories of sometimes violent knowledge practices which rehearse the body politics at the heart of debates over reproductive technologies, genetic engineering, abortion rights, welfare reform, and custody law. Birth stories, she says, signify a contest for control over, quote, the meaning and value of giving birth, of which they are in turn a vital part. The most common response I hear from women, especially those who gave birth many years ago, when I ask about their birth experience is, why would I want to go back there? When we speak our birth experiences, we don't go back. When we speak our past, we call it into the present, into our bodies, and we feel the feelings again. And perhaps it's this that we want to avoid, because it was painful, because we felt out of control, because we hated ourselves, because our bodies let us down, because we disassociated, because we can't change anything now. She's rubbing her left arm, constant pain. She turns 81 next week. She's remembering her daughter being born, and she continues to rub her arm. There's a story of how alone she was, how alone she'd always felt, how no one had told her anything of what would happen to her body. And when her daughter was placed into her arms, head on her left arm, she cried. She had never felt such a sense of belonging. They belonged to each other. They belong to each other now. Birth Cafe was an idea I had about 5 years ago as I emerged from my practice-based PhD. I had been trundling and trawling through the darkness of my own traumatized body, grasping for more light, and it came through my performance making and the deep listening and the speaking and listening and the opening and the not holding on anymore. Learning how to tell my experience from my body was a revelation. Each time I showed up, each time I spoke, I didn't know what new truth I would discover. And when it arrived, it was always a surprise. And so in Birth Cafe, I invite other women to share their birth stories from their bodies. She's looking out the window and her eyes are shining. I can see the light reflected in them. Right now in front of me, she's feeling that power, her power. She feels powerful. I sense my own uprightness, expansion at my chest. There is more space around my head. Invincible, she said. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was exactly what I needed. In the context of my own family, I often find it peculiar that I spend so much time thinking and talking about birth stories when no one else does. My mother birthed 5 of us. My sister birthed 6. My other sister is about to birth her 3rd. My brother's girlfriend birthed another 3. No major complications with any of them. Gas and air, epidurals, inductions, all taken in the stride of their experience. Do we only talk about our birth experiences when they've been difficult or traumatic? And if that's the case, then according to the most recent statistics, about 1/3 of women would be non-stop telling their stories. It's estimated that 1/3 of women experience birth trauma. This is not just another way of saying that their experience was difficult. Trauma is a real physiological and psychological experience. It happens when our experience is so overwhelming that a part of us believes it is going to die. And so it disassociates, cuts off, leaves in order to survive. The result is that this experience is never resolved in our system and we create a sort of closed loop. The energy of the overwhelm is never expressed, released, and becomes compressed in our body. We pull further away from our bodies to avoid the risk of feeling that again. We believe we are safer in our thoughts. And so we can spend our days being driven in the wild loops of a mental existence which come to own us. And we can cling to what we think we know. We can hold on to who we think we are. And it can take all our effort and lead us to exhaustion, maybe even depression. As I rolled through the contractions of my second birth experience, I lashed myself with piercing words like whips, useless, not good enough, getting it wrong, the same thing will happen again, it's all your fault. And my body, supported by a community of women, did what it needed to do, despite the torrent of abuse that my mind threw at it, and my baby was born. And for a short while, I was engulfed in awe, beauty, grace. But for the next 3 weeks, I couldn't write anything because the one who had been overridden in my mind was full of vengeance and she ripped me apart. My soft, ragged, stinging, leaky body, my inner judge rampaging and raging, my baby sleeping on my chest, doing that tiny little tugging breath that babies do, and my heart continuing to break open to all of this. I speak these words. I write my story. I create my own meaning. I challenge my own identity. I listen to other women reaching towards finding and speaking their own words. My heart opens and receives this, and in this opening, tendrils of compassion for myself begin to grow. I want to hear more real stories. I want to hear about ecstasy. Women who experience this in birth often keep it quiet, muted. I've heard some tone it down, apologize for it. They don't want others to feel, what, jealous, envious, like that is the experience I wanted, as though we can order our experience before it arrives. I want to hear about numbness, how she felt separate from the baby who was placed in her arms. I want to hear about pain. Nothing needs to be excluded. It is all welcome. Let's banish the ghosts. Let's reclaim our bodies and their deep experiential wisdom. Let's lose the critical self-judgment. Let's find resource and safety in our bodies. Let's heal ourselves. Let's come into our presence so that we can experience the fullness of being here now as the world itself births anew.